We all know this story. The quiet hero from a forgotten corner of the world. The impossible journey. The one terrible object that holds the fate of everything in its golden gleam. We see Frodo Baggins standing on the precipice of Mount Doom, and we feel the crushing weight of that moment. We've been told, time and again, that this was it. This was the only way. The long shot, the fool's hope, the single, fragile thread upon which the entire tapestry of Middle-earth depended. Every army, every king, every wizard was just buying time for this one small hobbit to do the one thing they could not. Destroy the ring. It's a perfect story. It's a powerful story. But here's the thing nobody talks about. It might not be the whole story. What if destroying the ring wasn't the only path to victory? What if the official version, the one we've all internalized, is a simplification, a beautiful, heroic simplification of a much more complex and uncertain reality? Buried in Tolkien's own letters, scattered through the appendices, hidden in the margins of his grand narrative, are the ghosts of other strategies, other hopes. There was a military path, a diplomatic path, even a spiritual path that had nothing to do with a volcano in the heart of Mordor. These weren't just fantasies, they were credible, if difficult, alternatives that were considered and, for some reason, discarded. What we're about to uncover changes not the outcome of the war, but its very nature. It transforms an epic of glorious, singular destiny into a desperate strategic puzzle with multiple, harrowing solutions. And it raises the most unsettling question of all. If other options existed, why did Gandalf, the architect of the entire war effort, stake the future of the world on the one path that was, by his own admission, the most likely to fail? What did he know, or perhaps, what did he fear, that made him turn away from the wisdom of generals and kings and place his final trust in the quiet courage of a hobbit? To understand the roads not taken, we first have to walk the main road, the one laid out for us at the Council of Elrond. The logic presented there is brutal and seemingly airtight. Sauron is simply too strong. His armies are numberless, his resources effectively infinite. The text tells us that he had gathered armies massed in Mordor that were enough to overwhelm all his remaining enemies at a single stroke. The free peoples are fractured, diminished, a pale shadow of their former glory. Gondor is proud but fading. Rohan is valiant but isolated. The elves are leaving these shores, and the dwarves are holed up in their mountains, nursing ancient grudges. Any attempt to face Sauron in open battle is therefore suicide. A direct military confrontation is not a strategy. It's a noble-sounding way to die. This is the foundational premise of the entire quest. Secondly, the ring itself. It cannot be used. To wield it, even against Sauron, is to become a new Dark Lord. Boromir's tragic fall is the cautionary tale, the proof of concept. The ring's power is corruption, absolute and irresistible. So you can't fight Sauron's armies, and you can't use his greatest weapon against him. The logical conclusion, presented so elegantly by Elrond, is that the ring must be unmade. It must be taken to the one place it can be destroyed, the fires of Mount Doom where it was forged. It's a perfect, inescapable syllogism of despair. But let's apply a little pressure to that first premise. Was Sauron's military might truly overwhelming? Or was that a calculated piece of psychological warfare believed by his enemies and, perhaps, even by himself? The numbers are intentionally vague in the books, but the narrative gives us clues. At the siege of Minas Tirith, Mordor throws what is presumably its greatest single army against the city. It is a terrifying force, with orcs, trolls, Haradrim, and the Witch King himself. And yet, they lose. The arrival of the Rohirrim and Aragorn with the Grey Company turns the tide. The Pelennor Fields are a stunning, catastrophic defeat for Sauron. He loses his greatest captain and a huge portion of his best troops. Yes, Tolkien makes it clear that Sauron had more armies in reserve. But this victory wasn't a fluke. It was proof that the combined strength of men, when properly led and motivated, could stand against the legion of Mordor and win a decisive battle. This wasn't just a holding action. It was a victory. This overlooked victory on the Pelennor Fields cracks the door open to a frightening and bloody alternative: the purely military option. What if the plan wasn't to distract Sauron with a tiny army at the Black Gate, but to actually fight a conventional war, not a war of conquest, but a war of attrition and strategic defense? Sauron's power, while immense, was not magical in the way we might think. He was a logistician. He had to feed, arm, and command his armies across vast distances. His strength was concentrated in Mordor, but his empire was stretched thin, held together by fear and the promise of plunder. The Free Peoples, on the other hand, were fighting on home ground. They had shorter supply lines, defensible terrain, and a cause that went deeper than mere conquest. They were fighting for their existence. Imagine a different strategy being forged after the victory at Minas Tirith. Instead of a desperate march on the Morannon, Aragorn, now hailed as king, consolidates his power. He uses the captured Corsair fleet to secure the southern coasts, cutting off the Haradrim from easy reinforcement. He rallies the men of the southern fiefs, swelling his army. He sends word to Dale and Erebor, who are already fighting their own desperate war against Sauron's Easterling allies. He coordinates with the elves of Lorien and Mirkwood, who are holding their own borders against attacks from Dol Guldur. This isn't a single, glorious charge. It's a long, grinding, brutal war. A world war for Middle-earth. The goal is not to march on Barad-dûr, but to bleed Sauron's armies dry, to break his client states, to contain him within the black land of Mordor, turning it from a fortress into a prison. In his letters, Tolkien himself entertains this possibility. He wrote that if the Free Peoples had not taken the bait and marched on the Morannon, Sauron would have been forced to come out and attack them at Minas Tirith again. But this time, he would be facing a larger, more organized, and more confident army under the command of the returned king. Tolkien speculates that Sauron would likely have still won in the long run, but he couches it with uncertainty. He says Sauron had not yet revealed his full strength, but also notes the unexpected strength and valor of his foes. The key word there is unexpected. Sauron, like many tyrants, believed his own propaganda. He underestimated his enemies. A war of attrition would have been horrific. The cost in lives would have been unimaginable. But it was not, as the Council of Elrond concluded, impossible. It was a real, viable military strategy. The implications of this are staggering. If a military victory, or at least a military stalemate, was even remotely possible, it reframes the entire quest. It was no longer the only hope, it was simply the preferred one. This choice wasn't just strategic, it was moral. Gandalf and Elrond weren't just generals making a calculation, they were philosophers making a statement about the kind of world they wanted to save. A world saved by the sword might simply create a new generation of warriors, a new cycle of violence and vengeance. A Gondor that triumphed through a long and brutal war might become something more like its enemy, hard, suspicious, and imperial. The quest, by contrast, offered a different kind of victory. One achieved not by strength of arms, but by humility, resilience, and an act of profound self-sacrifice. But before we get to Gandalf's reasoning, we have to explore the second forgotten path, one that runs parallel to the military option. This is the diplomatic path. We think of Sauron's allies, the Easterlings, the Haradrim, the Variags of Khand, as a monolithic evil, just orcs with a different skin tone. The story, from the perspective of our heroes, treats them that way. But Tolkien, in his deeper writings, gives us a far more nuanced picture. These were not demons, they were men, and they had their own reasons for siding with Mordor. In a note on the Druidine, Tolkien writes that Sauron was feared by all, and to some of the east and south he was a god. To others he was a liberator. For centuries, Gondor, in its pride, had acted as an imperial power, demanding tribute and dominating the peoples on its borders. The Haradrim and the Easterlings had long and bitter memories of Gondor's colonial past. For them, Sauron wasn't just a Dark Lord, he was the enemy of their enemy. He offered them revenge, power, and a place in his new world order. This political reality opens up another strategic door that seems to have been left firmly shut: diplomacy. What if, instead of just meeting these men on the battlefield, the West had tried to talk to them? Imagine Aragorn, heir of Isildur, but also a man who had travelled extensively in the south and east under the name Thorongil, sending emissaries not to Mordor, but to the courts of the Haradrim chieftains and Easterling lords. The message would not be one of threat, but of recognition. Sauron offers you slavery and a place in his shadow, the message might say. We offer you freedom and a place in the sun. Gondor has been proud and arrogant in the past, but a new age is dawning. Let us be allies, not vassals. Let us trade as equals. Sauron's victory means the end of all kings, yours included. Our victory means the restoration of just kingship for all. This seems impossibly naive, doesn't it? Trying to reason with the servants of the Dark Lord. But is it? Sauron's power over these men was based on lies, fear, and the exploitation of historical grievances. A genuine offer of peace and mutual respect from the fabled King of Gondor would have been a powerful counter-narrative. It would have sown dissent. It might have caused some chieftains to hesitate, to hold back their armies, to wonder if they had chosen the right side. This strategy doesn't require converting Sauron's entire alliance. It just requires peeling off a few key allies, enough to weaken his armies and complicate his logistics. It turns the war from a simple binary of good versus evil into a complex, multipolar political struggle. And this brings us to an uncomfortable question. Why was this never seriously considered? The Council of Elrond is a gathering of elves, dwarves, and the men of the West. There are no representatives from the east or south, no one to speak for the peoples who have fallen under Sauron's shadow. They are discussed only as enemies, as faceless legions to be fought. Was this a failure of imagination, or was it a form of prejudice, a deep-seated inability of the proud men of the West to see the lesser men of the south and east as anything other than barbarian hordes? We see a glimpse of this perspective through Sam Gamgee's eyes on the road to Mordor. He sees the body of a fallen Haradrim soldier and wonders about his name, his home, the lies that brought him here to die. It's a moment of profound empathy, but it's a footnote in the grand strategy. The leadership of the West, for all their wisdom, seemed to possess a critical blind spot. They were so focused on the metaphysical evil of Sauron that they overlooked the mundane political realities that gave that evil its worldly power. A combined military and diplomatic strategy, holding the line defensively while simultaneously working to fracture Sauron's coalition, could have profoundly changed the odds. It would have been a long, messy, and uncertain struggle. But it was, once again, a possible path, and its rejection tells us as much about our heroes as it does about their enemy. Now we arrive at the third and most speculative path, the most esoteric and perhaps the most tempting, the path of spiritual containment. The core problem, as defined at the Council, is the ring itself. It cannot be used, and it is a constant corrupting danger to anyone who possesses it. The only solution is destruction. But what if there was another way to neutralize it? Not to unmake it, but to contain it, to place it somewhere its evil could not reach out, somewhere it could be guarded or simply forgotten, until Sauron himself faded into nothingness without its power to sustain him. The first and most obvious option is presented and dismissed almost immediately at the council. Tom Bombadil. Goldberry says of him, "He is the master. He is utterly immune to the ring's power." When Frodo puts on the ring, Bombadil can still see him. When Bombadil puts on the ring, he doesn't vanish. The ring has no hold on him whatsoever. He is a walking, singing anomaly in Tolkien's meticulously crafted world. So, why not give him the ring? The answer given by Gandalf is strangely unconvincing. He says that Bombadil would not understand the importance of the task. He would probably mislay it or even throw it away. Such things have no hold on his mind. Elrond adds that it would be a dangerous strategy, because Bombadil's little country is a small island, and eventually the full power of Sauron would be brought to bear on it, and Bombadil would, in the end, fall. But would he? The nature of Bombadil's power is a mystery, but it seems absolute within his own domain. And is the risk of him mislaying it truly greater than the risk of two hobbits trying to walk into Mordor? It feels like an excuse, a rationalization for a decision already made. It's a dismissal of a power they don't understand and therefore don't trust. But there is another, far grander option for containment. What about taking the ring to the one place Sauron could never, ever reach? What about taking it to Pelennor, the undying lands, across the sea, the home of the Valar, the angelic powers who shaped the world? Sauron was a renegade of their order, a fallen Maya. The ring was a product of the knowledge he gained from them. Surely they had a responsibility to help deal with the consequences. Surely they possessed the power to either unmake the ring themselves, or at the very least, to guard it in a way that no power on Middle-earth could. The journey would be perilous, of course. A ship would have to be found, the straight road to the west would have to be taken. But was it more perilous than the road to Mordor? This option is never even discussed at the council. It's a non-starter. And the reason lies deep in the lore of the First Age. After the catastrophic War of Wrath, where the Valar intervened directly to overthrow the first Dark Lord, Morgoth, they effectively withdrew from the direct governance of Middle-earth. They sent the Astari, the wizards, as emissaries to guide and advise, but not to command or to wield power directly. They had decided that the children of Ilúvatar, elves and men, must find their own way, fight their own battles. To bring the ring to Pelennor would be to dump the problem back on their doorstep. It would be an admission of failure, a plea for divine intervention in a world that was supposed to be learning to stand on its own feet. And there was no guarantee they would even accept. They might see it as Middle-earth's problem to solve, a test of character for the races that remained. They might refuse the ring entry, fearing it could corrupt even their blessed realm. Or they might take it, and in doing so, diminish the peoples of Middle-earth, turning them into permanent dependents, forever looking over the sea for salvation instead of finding it within themselves. The refusal to even consider this path is a statement of profound, if terrifying, self-reliance. It is the leaders of Middle-earth saying, "We made this mess. We will clean it up." But it's also another example of a potential solution being taken off the table, not because it was impossible, but because it violated a philosophical principle. So now we have three distinct, alternative paths to victory. A war of attrition, fought with the combined armies of the West. A grand diplomatic strategy, aimed at fracturing Sauron's alliances. And a spiritual containment, placing the ring beyond Sauron's reach forever. Each of these paths was fraught with peril. Each had a high chance of failure. But so did the quest of the ring. The difference is that these other paths relied on the traditional instruments of power: armies, kings, diplomacy, and gods. The quest relied on none of them. And this brings us back to the central mystery. This brings us back to Gandalf. Gandalf the Grey, the pilgrim, the wanderer, the enemy of Sauron. He is the prime mover of the entire story. He discovers the nature of the ring. He pushes Bilbo to give it up. He guides Frodo to Rivendell. At the council, it is his voice, more than any other, that shapes the final decision. He is the chief strategist of the Free Peoples, and he watches all these other possibilities, military, diplomatic, spiritual, and he gently but firmly steers the council away from every single one of them. Why? Why choose the path with the smallest chance of success? Why risk everything on a fool's hope? To find the answer, we have to stop looking at the board and start looking at the players. Gandalf had been walking Middle-earth for 2,000 years. He had seen the waxing and waning of kingdoms. He had seen the pride of men and the sorrow of elves. He had seen their greatness, but he had also seen their weakness again and again. Let's imagine his thought process, the military option. He looks at Gondor. He sees Denethor, a man of great will, but broken by grief and pride, peering into a palantir and falling into despair. He sees Boromir, valiant and noble, but susceptible to the ring's temptation. He knows that to win a war of attrition would require a level of unity, sacrifice, and unwavering resolve that the race of men, as they currently existed, simply did not possess. They might win the first battle, but could they win the last? Could they endure a decades-long war without succumbing to infighting, betrayal, or despair? Gandalf had seen the last alliance of elves and men fall apart on the slopes of Mount Doom itself, when Isildur refused to destroy the ring. He knew that a victory won by force of arms would only empower the very pride and ambition that had allowed the ring to survive in the first place. He wasn't just trying to win a war, he was trying to break a cycle. The military option didn't break the cycle, it reset it. Then he considers the diplomatic path. He looks at the long, bitter history between Gondor and the peoples of the south and east. He knows the deep-seated prejudice and arrogance on both sides. Could Denethor ever bring himself to offer a genuine hand of friendship to the Haradrim? Could the Easterlings ever trust a promise from the heirs of those who had conquered them centuries ago? It would require a leap of faith, a radical act of humility and forgiveness that the political world, as it was structured, was simply not capable of. Aragorn might be able to do it, but he wasn't yet king. The institutions of power were too old, too proud, too set in their ways. Diplomacy would fail on the rocks of old hatreds. Finally, he thinks of containment. Tom Bombadil. He knows Tom is a force of nature, an entity outside the struggles of the world. But that is precisely the problem. Tom does not care. He is not invested. To give him the ring would be to abdicate responsibility, to hope that a mystery remains mysterious. It's not a solution, it's a deferral. And what of the Valar? Gandalf himself is one of their emissaries, a Maya like Sauron. He knows their minds better than anyone in Middle-earth. He knows of their withdrawal, their great policy of non-intervention. He knows that asking them for help would be to admit that the entire project of Middle-earth, the great experiment of letting the children of Ilúvatar find their own path, had failed. He was sent to inspire, to guide, to kindle courage, not to run home when things got difficult. To take the ring to Valinor would be a violation of his very purpose. He looks at every conventional solution, every path that relies on the great and the powerful, and he sees a fatal flaw woven into the very fabric of the people who would have to walk them. The kings are proud, the nations are divided, the gods are distant, the system is broken. And so, he makes the most radical decision in the history of Middle-earth. He decides to bypass the system entirely. He opts out. The quest to destroy the ring wasn't a military strategy. It wasn't a political strategy. It was a moral revolution. It was a declaration that the old ways of power, armies, thrones, ancient alliances, divine right, had failed. The only thing that hadn't been tried was the complete opposite: weakness, humility, obscurity. The only part of the world that Sauron wasn't looking at, wasn't thinking about, was the Shire. The only kind of person whose motivations the Dark Lord could not comprehend was a hobbit, who desires not power or dominion, but a good meal, a warm hearth, and a fine day for a walk. Gandalf's choice wasn't about the odds of success. It was about the meaning of success. What kind of victory is worth having? A victory that leaves the structures of power unchanged, ready for the next Dark Lord to rise? Or a victory that proves that the smallest, most powerless individual, armed only with love for a friend and a sense of duty, can change the course of the future? He gambled that the redemption of the world didn't lie in its kings, but in its gardeners. This is the core realization. The entire story we thought we knew was not about finding the one, technically correct way to defeat evil. It was about choosing a method of victory that would heal the world, not just conquer it. The destruction of the ring was, in a way, a secondary objective. The primary objective was to prove that pity, mercy, and friendship, the very qualities that Sauron despised and could not understand, were the most powerful forces in the world. Think of the critical moments: Frodo's decision to spare Gollum in the Emin Muil, Sam's unwavering loyalty when Frodo is captured in Cirith Ungol. Even at the very end, at the crack of doom, the quest technically fails. Frodo claims the ring. He is overcome. The plan, as designed, falls apart. And what saves the world? Not a king, not a wizard, not an army. It is the lingering consequence of a small act of mercy shown months earlier. Because Frodo spared Gollum, Gollum is there to take the ring from him, and in his madness he falls into the fire. The world is saved by a cascading chain of moral choices, not by a single heroic deed. Gandalf didn't just bet on a hobbit. He bet on a whole new theory of power. He bet that the accumulated weight of small, decent acts could overcome the concentrated mass of great evil. And this is where the story pivots from a fantasy epic into a profound meditation on how our own world works. We are constantly looking for the grand solution, the perfect political system, the decisive military victory, the technological breakthrough that will solve all our problems. We place our faith in institutions, in leaders, in power. We analyze the board, we calculate the odds, we try to game the system. But maybe the system isn't the point. Maybe, like Gandalf, we should be looking at the players. We see the seemingly intractable problems of our time: climate change, inequality, political division, and we despair because the institutions of power seem incapable of solving them. They are too slow, too compromised, too invested in the old ways of doing things. But the lesson of the quest is that when the great plans fail, the world is saved by the small, unofficial, and seemingly insignificant actions of ordinary people. It is saved by the activist who protects a forest, the neighbor who helps another in need, the artist who creates a moment of beauty in a dark time, the friend who refuses to give up on another. These are the hobbits of our world. Their actions don't show up in the grand strategic analyses, but they are the ones who are quietly changing the heart of things, creating a world where a different kind of victory is possible. And so, we return to that image of Frodo at Mount Doom. But we see it differently now. It is not the culmination of the only possible plan. It is the culmination of the chosen plan, the one that carried the seeds of a new world within it. The military victory might have saved the cities of men, but it might have left their hearts hardened. The diplomatic victory might have brought peace, but it would have been a fragile peace of treaties and compromises. The spiritual containment would have put the problem on hold, leaving the world in a state of perpetual anxiety. The quest, and only the quest, offered a victory that was also a redemption. It didn't just defeat the enemy, it affirmed the worth of the humble and the power of the merciful. The real tragedy, and the source of Gandalf's deep, weary sadness, is that he had to make this choice at all. His gamble on Frodo was also a vote of no confidence in everyone else. He looked at the proudest and most powerful beings of his age and realized they were not up to the task. He had to find his hope in the forgotten corners of the world because the centers of power were hollow. It's a bittersweet truth. The world was saved because a great wizard recognized the failure of greatness. The moral of the story isn't to always choose the path of greatest risk. It is to understand that the nature of your solution must match the true nature of your problem. The problem facing Middle-earth wasn't just a Dark Lord in a tower. It was a sickness in the hearts of its people, a weariness, a pride, a fading of hope, and a problem of the heart cannot be solved with a sword. So perhaps we should ask ourselves, when we face our own seemingly impossible challenges, have we truly considered all the paths? Not just the ones that rely on the old forms of power we already know, but the ones that rely on the quiet, resilient, and often overlooked strengths of the human spirit. What if the most important battles aren't the ones we fight with armies or argue in councils, but the ones we fight every day to prove that the smallest acts of grace are still the most powerful things in the world?